So glad you could join the Coegi Conclave series. We started this webinar series to provide a forum for discussions centered on practical and real-world challenges and solutions in the digital marketing space. And so we're excited to host our first webinar in this series with the topic of healthcare and pharma marketing. As we all know, because we're here, digital marketing has the capability to generate awareness, consideration, and intent throughout the journey for both patients and providers. However, marketing online in the healthcare and pharma space, as we also know, requires a lot of discipline due to the legal and industry regulations. At the same time, it's important to be innovative in order to distinguish our brands in this space. So we want to discuss what's happening on the front lines with healthcare marketers who, so to speak, have their boots on the ground and who are navigating these challenges. Just a few housekeeping notes. All of the participants and attendees should be muted, but please use the Q&A function throughout our discussion, and we will endeavor to answer all the questions after the panelists are done speaking. And I also want to introduce our panelists. We have Brittany Monroe, who's the Associate Director of Client Strategy here at Coegi. And Brittany has many years of experience in working with our pharma and healthcare clients and applying those best practices that we're going to be discussing today. We also have Chris Nooner. Chris is the Chief Strategy Officer at PulsePoint, which is a key platform for Coegi as we manage pharma and healthcare campaigns. Chris has many years of experience. I'm not going to say how many in the healthcare industry, but we've known each other for quite a few years. And Chris was instrumental in launching the Programmatic Health Council with PulsePoint and Coegi and a number of other companies in this space several years ago. So we look forward to his viewpoints. And we also have Margarita Coquizos, who's the Senior Client Strategist at True Media and leads their major healthcare and pharma brands. And we've partnered with Margarita a number of times over the years for some innovative campaigns in this space. So we want to jump right into this discussion. We're really looking forward to interacting with this panel because I know how experienced they are in this space. And Margarita, can I start with you? As you deal with clients, what is one or even two of the burning questions regarding marketing in health and pharma that you consistently hear?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest questions I get asked most often is, how can I make my budget work more efficiently? You know, I think that's going to be a common question regardless of what industry you're in, but I think it's definitely heightened in this space. You know, there's definitely a handful of really large healthcare and pharmaceutical companies out there that can spend hundreds of millions of dollars on advertising. But what do you do if you're not one of those brands? Or maybe even if you are one of those brands, how can you get your budget, how can we as a client get your budget to work more efficiently? And so I think one of the ways that I answer that question, you know, is the marketing landscape has really shifted. I think gone are the days where you need to spend, you know, you just throw all the money you have out there and hoping something sticks or gets in front of the right person. Now it's really shifting to how can we become smarter and how can we make sure that we're getting our message in front of the right audience and reducing waste. And I think that that's really the main benefit of leading with a digital first approach.
That's a great point. And those principles and that approach of making the best use of our media and our marketing dollars really does apply to both the smaller and larger pharma brands, or when you think of hospital marketing, you have some service lines that are very common to the population, whereas others may be some specific procedures, and we have to be more strategic in the use of those dollars. So yeah, that's a great point, Margarita. And Chris, what's been your experience with regards to managing budgets to deliver the best ROI on some of these healthcare and marketing campaigns over the years?
Yeah, perfect, because that's sort of broadly what the question is as well. You know, how are you driving performance? And I think it's always important, and I know we're going to probably get there in the conversation as well, but I like to start here is that, all of us are on a greater mission. That greater mission is on patient education and physician education to drive better health outcomes. I mean, so anything that we want to talk about performance and driving, we have to just ground ourselves first in understanding that performance means that somebody is getting healthy. And so when you put it into that context, then you could start to get into some of the granular questions that we're getting in terms of performance, whether it's measured by a third party like a Crossix or an IQVIA or Symphony, or PulsePoint is getting into this measurement area. We're getting questions around performance that says, how do you know if it's a patient or a caregiver? How do you know if you're influencing the influencers? When it's on the physician side, how do you know it's a specialty? How do you know it's exactly that NPI that you are reaching? And then lastly, how are you taking all of this disparate data, whether it's the patient over here that's seeing the physician over here, where you might have pharma and the sales rep over here, and linking all of that data together in one cohesive marketing strategy? And those are some of the questions and the intricacies that we're getting down into.
Absolutely. And yeah, hopefully we will have some time to talk in more detail on measurement, because that really is a key to setting up that framework ahead of time to make sure that we're getting the most out of our marketing dollars. And also, it's important to understand that with digital marketing and with programmatic now, we've opened up the opportunity to identify channels and audience segments that may, in times past, have been overlooked. Brittany, could you comment on that? What are some of the cases where that's proven to be true, to where maybe there's a marketing channel or a strategy that we now, with that data that's available to us, we can see that it's something that we should implement in our campaigns?
Absolutely. So one thing that really comes to mind is the use of social media platforms. So, Chris mentioned caregivers and community, and that channel is really strong in reaching both the patient and also their immediate ecosystem of support. And in addition to that, we can really get pretty granular and efficient for service lines for hospitals, for instance, but also on the pharmaceutical side too, of having the creative to support information safety statements and being able to really have a holistic and full funnel approach within these social platforms while driving that efficiency as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great start to our discussion. Let's shift gears just a little bit. And Brittany, I'd like to come back to you. How have you seen over the past 5 years or so the landscape of healthcare marketing change?
So a few years ago, even the past 3, I'd say a lot of our campaigns and our media was focused around that patient perspective and getting potential patients to come to seek a physician, to identify service lines, or to just get treatments. But in the course of, in particular, the 3 years I mentioned, we've seen this really big push to also engage with the physician, because we recognize that they have a journey as well, to be introduced to a medical device, to be prescribing a new drug. And so ultimately you do have an interaction between both the patient and the physician, but each of their journeys are really unique. And it's been really interesting to see how we as marketers are approaching those journeys in different ways, and kind of having that conversation of, well, is this patient or is it physician focused, and continuing to grow each of those competencies while also focusing on that point of care, and really just educating both the patient and the physician too.
Yes, that is a key approach in the world in which we live today of healthcare marketing. So we'll have a poll question come up as to how you're approaching these type of campaigns here in a moment. But Chris, can I toss it to you as to what you've seen in your platform along the lines of what Brittany's talking about?
Yeah, and I wanted to jump in. I just want to make sure it was the right time. I went off mute and I'm like, I'd love to continue on this conversation, because I totally agree with Brittany in terms of, when I started at PulsePoint 4.5 years ago, I thought 80% of our marketing campaigns were going to be very focused on the patient. In the first few years, it was actually exactly the opposite. And I just want to think about this, from a broader landscape, perspective, where healthcare marketing is a $55 billion total addressable market, right? And 15 years ago, I was still in this industry, Sean, yes. We saw 180,000 sales reps in market, right? And now let's flash forward to today. We're seeing less than half of that number in market, with the things like the Sunshine Act that was released. And listen, today, you think a sales rep is getting into a physician office to talk to a doctor during COVID? I mean, you are talking about a massive strain. And the other, instance, do you think a physician right now is going to a conference, and traveling right now in order to learn about the latest products? On that note, we had Scott Gottlieb speak at our conclave, a few weeks ago, who talked about, how many drugs have come into the market over the last 10 years, with the FDA, and how quick, an acceleration of great products that are all helping us, today. And the question is, who is educating them now when those sales reps are at home? Who is educating them now when those physicians can't go to the conferences and learn about it? And so that shift that Brittany was talking about is, we are trying to figure out new ways in order to get in front of that physician and understand how to detail them, how to do, non-personal promotion for that physician wherever they are, however they are. And so we're seeing, just like this Zoom call, this is the ability that we are linking technology and data in order to drive better education. And that shift, I think, is just getting accelerated now that we're, going through this. So I totally agree, and see that physician and linking, as Brittany was talking about as well. And now you have two disparate data sets that you can start to influence now those patients who are getting to those physicians. I also remember when doctors used to complain about, hey, I don't like DTC advertising because patients are coming in and saying, hey, what about this drug? And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about and how this is. And so this is our ability to link the two sides, with the patients getting the same information as the physician, and it's bringing them together in a whole different way, where communication is expanded as opposed to retracted.
Absolutely. That's what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to get the patient and the provider to that conversation. When we do that, we're really doing our job well. So you mentioned the use of data. So Margarita, maybe I can kick this back over to you. Whichever type of campaign we're running, whether it's DTC or HCP, the use of data can be tricky, as we know, HIPAA considerations and so forth. And we have to be mindful as well of how the brand's interacting with patients and consumers on sensitive subjects. So what are some of the best practices that you've seen that should be implemented when approaching data and in healthcare and pharma campaigns?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right that reaching patients is definitely much trickier given HIPAA, and rightfully so. Those laws are there for a reason. And so just trying to get creative with how can we still create those meaningful conversations with them and make sure that they know a solution is out there to help them lead a healthier life. So I think one of the things that is really key is focusing on contextual targeting. So making sure your brand message is alongside relevant content, trusted healthcare content is really, might seem a little bit like a simple solution, but it's really powerful, because not only are you reaching them when they're in the right mindset, you can also reach, I'm going to call it a fringe audience, but you're also reaching their caregivers, their friends and family. So you're broadening that reach, and you're just making sure that more people, there's more opportunities for your brand to get in front of people and ultimately, help assist them through that patient and caregiver journey.
Yeah, that's a great point. And then Chris, from a more analytical or direct tracking standpoint, what are some of the tools that are available right now to see the effectiveness of the use of data? And it probably leans more towards HCP, but I'd be interested in general as to what you're seeing available now.
That's perfect. And just to add on to what Margarita was just saying from a contextual perspective, you know, if you think about contextual advertising and that use of data, the systems, you know, when we came into it, were not set up to understand contextual. If you did a IAB7, sort of contextual category on programmatic, you know, you wouldn't get to metastatic breast 3 cancer. And by the way, if you looked at cancer, you might get a horoscope page, you know, as opposed to a metastatic breast 3 cancer page. And so one of the things that we personally did at PulsePoint was we linked our contextualizer to something that's called the mesh taxonomy, which is what the National Institute of Health uses, and to understand word density around a page. So if, you know, metastatic and cancer and, you know, oncology was all on one page, the likelihood from a programmatic perspective, and of course you're always going to have the WebMDs and the, you know, MedPage, you know, today's, you know, websites that have, you know, that wonderful contextual density of that page. But when you're just asking a crawler to go determine a page, you know, the systems weren't there until PulsePoint came along. The second thing that on a data and an analytics perspective, one of the things that we saw that was missing in the market was this this association of a digital ID, whether it's a cookie or IDFA or Google ID or a device or a tablet, whatever the common denominator is, to a physician or a health activity, right? We saw a lot of either probabilistic, you know, ways of doing it, or we saw just not very comprehensive ways of doing it. So we built this machine that was reliant on opt-in consent to deterministically re-identify, in many cases, from a reporting and an analytics perspective, audiences. And when we do that, then you start to really understand what is the marketing effectiveness of our campaign. Did that physician come through this very specific keyword who came on my page, and she then did this type of journey and was looking for this type of information? And that analysis didn't really exist, you know, a few years back. And
yeah, that's very recent. Yeah, it's very recent. So on the HCP side, we can be very specific with some targeting and even the reporting on that. And that's certainly a tool that we want to have in our toolbox, you know, as we move forward in this space. Now, it's also important for us to line up the appropriate messaging and creative when we are getting better and better at being more precise with the targeting of our media, but we also want to communicate the right message and in the right context. And Margarita, you've used a phrase in the past that I really appreciate, and that's leading with empathy. Can you touch a little bit on that as to how we can approach that about lining up our media with our messaging and our creative when it comes to sensitive subjects, or right now in the middle of COVID and, you know, the anxiety that comes with that, as to how we can be effective in that regard?
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, empathy itself not only means the ability to understand something and what something's going through, but also the ability to share those feelings yourself. So taking that a little bit further. And so when I think leading with empathy really means is taking a step back in the planning process to really put yourself in the shoes of your target audience. So you not only understand them, but you begin to almost have the same feelings that they do. So, you know, you mentioned COVID. The world that we're living in now is just so drastically different than it was before, and we're all living it in our own way. We know that people are still tearing their ACLs. We know people are still suffering from their chronic and acute conditions, maybe now more than ever before. So I think it really comes down to the user experience and the brand messaging. So making sure that your brand messaging, the creative, is really leading with empathy. I think always, but especially now. And then as marketers, as we're going through the maybe a little bit more of the tactical planning process, is how can we pair that empathetic messaging to align with your target audience's media habits? So people are spending more time at home. Does that mean that they're spending more time watching Hulu? Maybe we should run more ads on Hulu. You know, Chris, you mentioned this earlier, doctors may not be going to industry conferences anymore, but their need to stay up to date on the best practices and the latest technologies and best way to take care of their patients, that's not going anywhere. So understanding how your target audience's media habits are shifting so that you can not only create that empathetic messaging, but you're also putting it in front of them in the right environment as well. And I think when you really lead with empathy, you're more likely to break through all the clutter that's out there right now.
Yeah, Sean, I'll jump on that too, because you're on mute, Sean. Oh, Sean, I think you're on mute, buddy. There you go.
Oh yeah. Hey, I wanted to kick something to Brittany real quick. Brittany, have you seen a shift in media habits like what Margarita was talking about, i.e. streaming, you know, and channels such as that, and how, you know, how have we adapted with our clients to, you know, make the most of this opportunity to engage, whether it's HCPs or patients, with these shifting media habits?
Sure. So connected TV in particular has been a channel that has really just skyrocketed through the course of the pandemic. I would even say in the course of individuals over the age of 55 as well. So people who are maybe a little bit less likely to kind of adopt some of these Hulu subscriptions or Disney Pluses have really shifted into that, given the propensity to be at home a lot more. But entirely correct in terms of how people are engaging. They're also spending that time as a family, which I think is really important when you look at empathy and letting people really navigate the course of their treatments, and also how do they have those conversations with family members when it might be a little bit harder to digest. So in terms of channel, I would definitely say connected TV and the television has really taken off, but an audience as well, people are more likely to have those telehealth appointments. Teletherapy, as we look at people's mental health and well-being, has really shown a growth as well during this time. And so reaching that point of care, both from a physician standpoint of understanding which physicians are treating through digital devices, and also which population is comfortable with that, because not everybody is willing to chat with a nurse practitioner because they have a sinus infection over the phone versus wanting to go in and actually get someone to examine them. So recognizing that user behavior still isn't the same, but like Margarita said, certain procedures now are able to be conducted. People are getting their ACL repairs, but how do we go about it in a really cognizant way while also reaching those people on the devices that they're using most often?
All right, thanks, good points. And I want to make sure that we have a chance to talk about measurement. And Brittany, if you could continue on this topic about how do we make measurement the focus of our campaigns, and what's the differences between measurement with providers versus patients? I mentioned earlier, we can be a lot more precise in our tracking with providers, and maybe even touching on the importance of the MPI now with some of those campaigns.
Right. So the MPI, or the National Provider Identifier, is such a unique tool in the toolbox because not every industry has something like that, where it is specific one-to-one, stays with you no matter if you switch hospitals. That's your unique code and identification through the course of your career. And so our ability through tools to be able to track what that physician and that provider is doing is really valuable in the sense of it understanding their journey to say, hey, they engaged with our video ad, let's go ahead and remarket to this specific group of people. Or in turn, these are our core sets of physicians that we want to convert to the adoption of our treatment, be it device or prescription drug, let's go ahead and, especially in this climate, educate them, like Chris mentioned, and really reach them to show them, hey, like this is available for treatment for your patient, so they don't have the patient in their office asking for something that they have nothing, no knowledge about. On the patient side of things, kind of switching gears, it's also critical that we do show and measure that engagement so that we are really focusing back on our main goal here of education and providing tools and resources to people that may not know that this is available to them. And so I actually think back to when I was a kid, I went on allergy shots, and it really changed kind of my day-to-day life and quality of life. But it took forever because they tried different things. And I think back to that of, hey, if there had been some marketing, my parents would have had quicker insight into something that was really helpful for their child. And so I think at the end of the day, measuring that success with downloading an information statement or, an info packet, for instance, as we don't necessarily want to have that tracking to say that someone prescribed in that sense, since that is, cognizant of HIPAA, but rather how are we educating the patient so they can have these really informed decisions with their physician as well.
Excellent point. Thank you, Brittany. And Margarita, are there any other things that you look at as far as tracking the patient journey as indicators that we are moving, patients through their journey as they're making these decisions?
Yeah, I think just piggybacking off of what Brittany mentioned, again, reaching and tracking the patients is definitely a bit trickier and sometimes can't always be done. So I think one of the things that's important to keep in mind is understanding the larger picture of your marketing strategy. Sometimes there's different parties involved in paid media and different parties involved in PR or earned media. So understanding how all of them work together, because each of them are equally important. So I think looking at your website analytics, understanding how users come to your site, but then also how they navigate throughout the site, because maybe, something could be indicative of, hey, maybe I should have more content on my website so I can help, the patients navigate through their journey and help answer those questions. But then I think also too, a little bit more tactically, to really understand if your marketing is making an impact, is there sales data that you can layer on top of, your media dollars or on top of your larger marketing efforts to see if your marketing is really affecting the bottom line, if that's your overall goal.
Excellent. Thank you, Margarita. And Chris, I know that you've already touched on this, but with regards to tracking the patient journey versus the HCP journey, are there a couple of, I guess, staples from a technical standpoint that we can put in place to do that effectively?
Yeah, and I've been biting my tongue because the few things that were talked about sort of brings a personal story that, Brittany, you and Sean know, and I'm quite vocal about, is I have allergies as well. And with those allergies, sometimes it manifests in something which I have, which is called eosinophilic esophagitis, which is a mouthful. But I like to be vocal about it because so many people are undiagnosed with this. If you ever feel a feeling where something kind of gets lodged in your esophagus, it doesn't quite go down, it might be this thing called eosinophilic esophagitis. And what it is when you have too many white blood cells in your system attacking those allergies, it hardens your esophagus. The reason why I'm telling you this whole background story is not to say, hey, by the way, there's help out there for you, is during COVID, CTV, I was watching, an ad came on for Dupixent, which is Regeneron, that said, we have a treatment that kills, that attacks eosinophils. And I hadn't talked to my allergist in about 20 years. I got on a teleconference with her and she looked down and she said, oh my God, Chris, this is the perfect drug for you. I started it, maybe 3 months ago, and it has been absolutely game changing. And those are the outcomes that you want to see. And that's why we do what we do. And I also mentioned another story going into a pharma company I won't mention, but you walk down the halls and you see these banners that say, I work for, and it's each patient story. Like, I work for Susan, I work for John, I work for so-and-so. So just wanted to bridge that into what Margarita and Brittany were saying from an empathy perspective, from a CTV perspective, and an effectiveness perspective, because my allergist would not have reached out to me. I would not have reached out to her unless it was for the power of CTV. The second thing is just, how do we measure the two? And yeah, I mean, we're doing device graphs on seeing physicians in office, devices that we're seeing in office, devices that we're seeing just transiently through office, and trying to understand contextual behavior of device IDs and breaking them breaking them apart. So if somebody is having swallowing problems, we can reach it. And by the way, from a HIPAA perspective, I would absolutely sign my information away if I knew that Dupixent could have gotten to me 2 years ago. It would have been fantastic. And so that layer of how to use the data, but we also talked about the NAI with sensitive conditions, that if I have sexually transmitted diseases or mental health issues or cancer, and I'm using a public computer or a house computer, and all of a sudden I get retargeted with these ads, and we're all sophisticated enough to be like, hey, honey, did something that you want to tell me about your condition? These are the things that we all have to think about. And going back to how you started, Sean, with the Programmatic Health Council, that was one of the forums that we needed to think about how to have these discussions in order to do right with the data, to make sure that we are not doing anything. I mean, all healthcare data is sensitive, but doing it in the most appropriate way to ultimately drive those outcomes.
Absolutely, and I think collectively we've done a good job at that over the last couple of years, and this discussion here is a great example of the types of people that are in the space now, understanding how to navigate the digital landscape in this industry. So we actually run a little bit over time over what we planned. So I'll just kind of wrap up our discussion today. We hope that there's some takeaways for everybody that was able to join us today. And we'll also be sending out a recording of this to everyone that joined or that signed up that may not be able to make it over the lunch hour. But a few of the key things that we talked about is, one is taking advantage of the ability that digital and programmatic and social gives us to segment our audiences and to understand how we can reach them across channels for more efficient reach and engagement, whether that's consumers or providers. Then I think it came out pretty clearly that we need to adopt separate approaches for campaigns to patients and providers respectively. We're trying to accomplish different things in terms of education or value propositions and so forth. There's different ways that we can use data in each case. A really important point that I liked is with regards to leading with empathy, but also promoting education, is aligning our messaging and context, the importance of content and contextual relevance with our media delivery. And then lastly, I think we ended on a pretty important point on implementing specific measurement frameworks for our product or service. And ultimately what we're trying to do, as was mentioned a couple of times, was to facilitate that provider to patient communication about our products and services. That's when decisions are made, right? So when we can affect the patient's consideration journey and education journey in a way that when they're in the doctor's office, they can have that conversation, and then the provider as well, they're ready for that conversation, why then, we've done our job. But with Chris sharing his experience and Brittany and Margarita, we see there's also a human component to this as well, which makes marketing in this space different than some of the others. So I'm glad that we could lead with this topic. I want to thank all of our panelists, Chris, Brittany, Margarita. You guys were awesome as always, and I really appreciated your insights. And again, there will be a one-sheeter available as well for everyone that views this webinar with some of these key takeaways. And so we hope you enjoyed these perspectives and best practices from the front line of healthcare and pharma marketing.